challenging time. But I completely agree with Richard that it will be a time where the partnership we have between central and local government, but also the involvement of users and voice in public services will be vital to make sure that we can make our budgets go further and deliver our objectives. And it means that when we're thinking about public service reform, I think we have to learn some of the lessons we've learned from some of the reforms we've done over the last few years. I've now moved to a department in the last couple of years, Children's Schools and Families, which is quite different from the Treasury where I worked for a number of years. Different, say, from the Department of Work and Pensions, where the Schools Minister, Jim Knight, has just moved over to work. In the Treasury, if you want to collect taxes, then you pass a law, hand the instruction over to these tax inspectors, and they go out and collect the money. In the case of the Department of Work and Pensions, if you want to change the benefit rules, you pass a law, change the rules, and then this is implemented and delivered on the ground. It doesn't work that way in children's schools and families, because we don't really have the ability to issue instructions. What we do is work very closely with thousands of schools all around the country, and also local authorities as commissioners of those school services and those children's services. And it's whether we win the hearts and minds of the decision makers in local government and individual schools which makes the biggest difference. And I think there are some real lessons to learn from the experience that Harry was just talking about in the way in which we've been improving services for disabled children over the last few years. First of all, that the issue of disabled children and their families is in my view, both a sign of the civilization of a society. What you do for children with the greatest need and families under the greatest pressure is a hugely important test, but it's a test which, unless you get your accountability right, will slip off the radar. So it's very important to have this in headlights. Secondly, that you can only meet the needs of disabled children and their families if you have, at a local level, really intense joint working and accountability of education services and health services to really meet the needs of those families. But thirdly, and most importantly, you've got to start from the needs and views of families themselves. And I know the work I've done with Treehouse and other organisations, the thing which is most frustrating for families is to get services when it is most convenient for the service provider, rather than when the service user most needs it, and not to have a say in the way in which those services are designed and delivered for them. And so when I think of public service reform, I think about collaboration between different public services locally, being attested for and accountable for meeting the needs of local families and users, and for that being the thing which really drives the way in which we provide those services for the future. And that is, I think, a more bottom-up and a more user-orientated approach to public services than the kind of more top-down and centralised view of public services which you might have thought of 10, 20, 30 years ago. And that for me is the biggest change which has happened in public service delivery and reform. Sometimes I think in the last 5 years we've made the mistake of thinking that public service reform has to mean the involvement of the private sector. And sometimes the private sector has a really important role to play in public service delivery. But I think the really big public service reforms have been about local commissioning, joint local working in delivery, and the involvement of users in public services and giving them a voice. And this is something which is very real in the kind of work I'm doing regularly with both Richard and Claire. I've worked very closely with Claire in recent months as we've been putting together our response to the difficulties in Haringey at the end of last year. And that is fundamentally about local ownership and political accountability, which Claire has led, but also forging a partnership between children's services and the police and the health service, which before was inadequate. And that's not something which I can impose from the centre. It's not something which is going to be delivered by the private sector. What it requires is a degree of commitment and joint working by professionals working locally, and I think Claire is leading real improvements. When you think of the work Richard's been leading in Manchester around school improvement, I think over the last 10 years, sometimes we sent out mixed messages to local government about what we wanted in education. Sometimes I think we talked as though the local authority role was part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And I have to say that there are some local authorities I deal with who are still part of the problem rather than part of the solution when it comes to to school improvement. But actually there is no way in which we can drive the performance of every school and ensure every child gets the support they need, whether they have a special need or whether they need extra help from the central direction. It fundamentally depends upon a partnership at a local level between individual schools, governing bodies, and the services which they rely upon locally and the local government commissioning role. And I've been very clear in the last 2 or 3 years, and Richard has been a leader in this, that we need to see, area by area, a real commitment to school improvement. We don't want to know some schools are doing well. We want to know what is a plan for every school, and especially those who have been in the past not doing as well as we would like. And we've been challenging to local authorities for them to use their powers in order to intervene and drive school improvement where in the past I think underperformance has sometimes been ignored or pushed under the carpet. And I would say in the last 2 years the response of local government to this agenda has been really strong and very powerful. And as I said, the work that Leeds has been, Richard's been doing in Manchester, but also local government in Hackney, in many other parts of the Labour local government world to drive school improvement has been really, really strong. When it comes to this issue of financial constraint, we are going to go into a more difficult time for public spending, as Richard said. And I've not been trying to preempt the debate. I've been trying in our discussions in the schools and children's services world to start the debate, which we need to have over the next year and 18 months as we prepare for budgets after 2011, about how we deal with tighter financial circumstances going forward. I'm very clear. I don't want to see cuts in education budgets at all. I think one of the great achievements of our government in the last 10 years, last 12 years, has been the 85% real terms rise in per pupil funding in education, and I want to see that carry on rising into the future. I want to see us keep the 40,000 extra teachers we've got, over 110,000 teaching assistants in our schools who are making a huge difference. We this year have the largest school building programme since the Victorian era being driven by local government around the country. And I want to keep our commitment that we will rebuild and refurbish every secondary school in the next 10 years. I want to make sure that we get to our goal of 3,500 children's centres in every community. But if we're going to do those things and deliver the one-to-one tuition we're now doing in our schools and keep the extended schools programme and the short breaks for disabled children, which have been very much part of our pitch in recent years, we are going to have to think about how we deal with tighter circumstances where budgets are not going to rise as fast as they've done in recent years. And again, that comes back to partnership and local leadership. The areas I've talked about in recent weeks have been procurement. We have in the moment schools and local government for education, about £7.8 billion a year spent on procuring services, whether that's caretaking or catering or energy bills or all the other services schools buy. And I think we need to look very hard at those procurement issues. We need to look hard at the issue of school balances. We currently have about £600 million of money sitting in schools in balances, not small balances or sensible balances, which are there to prepare for a rainy day or a particular project, but budgets which are well over the threshold where local government has got the power to intervene and look at those issues. We need to look centrally at our field forces and the number of people we have out there working with, supporting and advising local government, and I am very strongly committed to seeing that school improvement role devolve down to individual schools and institutions. But also we need to look at another aspect of public sector reform which we've been driving very powerfully in recent years, which is schools working together and collaborating together. And I have no doubt in both the primary school sector and in the secondary school sector, we can have schools working together, sharing leadership, driving up standards, whether that's stronger schools supporting weaker schools or schools which are all doing well working together, which can first and foremost be about school improvement, but will also enable us to make efficiency savings as part of those partnerships and that collaboration, which can release resources back to the front line and keep the teachers and the teaching assistants. This can't be done by, as I said, a central diktat. This is not a tax ministry. This is not the benefits agency. It will depend upon the individual decisions being made by schools and governing bodies around the country and the partnership they have at a local level with local government as we put together collaborative arrangements in school balances or in procurement. But I think if we start now, and we recognise the importance of parental voice, local authority commissioning and school leadership, I think we can definitely continue and indeed accelerate public service reform through the kind of collaboration and partnership and accountability which will also free up the resources to keep investing in the front line. So I completely agree with Richard. In tighter financial circumstances, the right kind of public service reform will be vital to make sure that we keep delivering for children in our country.